Welcome to Equip, Build, and Mature. Hope you're having a great day. As we do on Saturdays, we take an overview of one of the books of the Bible. And today we're going to be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. So who wrote the document? Well, the title, Ecclesiastes, is from a Greek word that describes a person who calls together an assembly of people. So it makes sense that the author identified himself in Ecclesiastes 1:1 with the Hebrew word koheleth. It translates as preacher. So the author only gave that cryptic name for his identity. Now, evidence in the book and most Jewish and Christian tradition suggests that King Solomon was the author of Ecclesiastes. So this preacher described himself in these three ways. First, in chapter 1, verse 1, he describes himself as son of David, king in Jerusalem. The second way he described himself was in chapter 1, verse 16, one who amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me. And third, the way he described himself was, this is in chapter 12, verse 9, one who arranged many proverbs. So Solomon ruled in Jerusalem after his father David. He was David's only son to rule over all Israel in a united kingdom from the city of Jerusalem. We see that in chapter 1 in verse 12. Solomon was the wisest man in the world during his lifetime, or during his time. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 and 30. And Solomon wrote most of the book of Proverbs. We see it in chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 10, verse 1, chapter 25, verse 1. So we can say with confidence that Solomon was the koheleth of the opening verse, the preacher. So what time in history is it? What time in history is this taking place? Well, since Solomon wrote the book, he had to write it, obviously, before he died, which was in 931 BC. Now, the content of Ecclesiastes, it reveals someone who's looking backward on his life, with many experiences, but few eternal rewards. So as the king of Israel, Solomon had the opportunity and had the resources to pursue the rewards of wisdom, pleasure, and work without being concerned about making a living. The mood and atmosphere of this document is one of someone being weary of the world. It implies that late in his life, Solomon looked backward on his foolish life with great regret. And he points the readers to a better, simpler life lived with the fear of God. You can read his great conclusion in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. So why is the book of Ecclesiastes so important? Well, it's because the book's perspective is only a physical reality view of what life is. Life in this book is only seen from a physical human perspective, as the author Solomon continues to say the phrase, living life under the sun. That's without any spiritual connection, without any reference to God, only what we can do in terms of humanism, what humans in and of themselves can accomplish. But eventually, Solomon recognized that God was the only sovereign in the world. And people who have witnessed a lot of pain and much instability in their lives, but still hope in God, can really identify with this human-only perspective that we find Solomon writing with in Ecclesiastes. So what is the big idea? Well, Ecclesiastes represents a journey from one point to another. And Solomon stated his starting point early in the book. He says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2, this is his starting point. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. So he saw life as totally empty. He saw his life as without any meaning at all. Nothing made any sense to him at all. He'd already pursued many answers. He'd pursued life's answers in pleasure and work and intellectual pursuits to improve his sense of feeling totally lost in this world. The writer desperately searched for meaning in life, and he searched for significance in life. Though God had always been there, he wasn't always living with an awareness of God's presence. God provides our food and our drink and our water. He speaks of this in chapter 2, verse 24. The sinner and the righteous person both live in God's sight, he says in chapter 2, verse 26. He says in chapter 3, verse 14, that God's actions are eternal. And he says in chapter 5, verse 19, that God enables people to enjoy what it is that God provides them. We find the great and decisive truth of Ecclesiastes only if we acknowledge that God is always involved in our lives. Even if injustice and uncertainty feel so overwhelming to us, he says in chapter 12, verses 13 to 14, that we can and should trust God and totally give our lives to him. So how does this book apply to us? Oh, we all want to find the meaning in life. Many times that search for life's meaning takes us on winding and up and down paths filled with brief moments of satisfaction. And those brief moments shine bright just for a second, but then they eventually and quickly fade away. And the honest reality found in Ecclesiastes is very encouraging. This book that I believe Solomon wrote, it enables us to realize our common struggles as humans. We can relate to Solomon's journey because for many of us, it is our journey. Trying to find meaning by chasing pleasure, by building our lives around our jobs, or relying on our intellect for our sense of value. But eventually, we discover that each of these pursuits is a dead end. It takes us nowhere. It is not a path that goes where we think it's going to take us. Ecclesiastes shows us a man who lived through this process, and he came out on the other side with a wiser, more experienced perspective. If you've ever felt like you're strongly tempted to shout that life is empty, Ecclesiastes offers a perspective that is gained from experience, and ultimately his life was seen from God's perspective. Life is never going to satisfy us if we do not recognize God's involvement in our lives, God's authority in our lives. The only question is, will you choose to place your faith in God and in God's certain incapable hands and will and purpose? Have you ever struggled with misplaced priorities or misplaced pursuits in your life? Have you ever lost the meaning that you crave, the purpose that you crave, that you seek to find for your life? If you have experienced those things, I encourage you, pick up Ecclesiastes and read through it. Listen to the words of Solomon. They might encourage you, in the end, to put your trust totally, fully, and only in God. Thank you guys for taking some time to share with me as we listen to these thoughts about Ecclesiastes. Hope you have a great Saturday, and may God continue to bless us in our search for the meaning He gives to our lives. Take care.